Today I'm going to show you how to draw a histogram, and then I'm going to leave you with an example to do on your own. So in this first example, it says, create a histogram for each set of data. For the first problem, the graph is set up for you. For the second problem, you will need to determine the best way to number the axes. Do not forget to include a title as well. All right, so it tells us that the first set of data, number 1, says it's chocolate candies per bag of trail mix. Right, so here they've counted up the number of chocolate candies in a bag of trail mix. And you can see our data off to the side there. It's 50, 67, 49, 42, 61, and so on. And then below we have a frequency table. Okay, so they've already set up the intervals for us in this one. It says the first interval goes from 1 chocolate candy to 20 chocolate candies, then 21 to 40, 41 to 60, 61 to 80, and 81 to 100. Now, a good rule of thumb for how to set up these intervals is to look at your data, identify the smallest data point and the largest data point, and then that'll help you determine how you want to set up your intervals. Our next column is the frequency column. This is where we're going to count up every data point that lies in that interval. And then we have the class boundaries, which is the halfway point between the end of one interval and the beginning of the next interval. And then the midpoint, which is the halfway point between the interval itself. So, for example, the halfway point between 1 and 20, or the halfway point between 21 and 40. All right, so we're going to start by setting up or filling in our frequency column. All right, so I have filled in the frequency column here. You may want to pause the video and just count them up for yourself. A good way to do this, if you have it written down on paper, is to cross out the numbers as you go through. Right, so I've counted up the intervals, or counted up the frequency. It says between 1 and 20 we had 0 data points. Between 21 and 40 we had 4 data points. Between 41 and 60 we had 6. Between 61 and 80 we had 7. And then between 81 and 100 you have 4. Now this is the only column you really need to set up your histogram, but I'm going to tell you how you calculate the class boundaries and midpoints, just in case you need to do that on the homework, or if you need to identify the class boundary or the midpoint on the test. Alright, so here I've given you a little hint. It says that the class boundary is the number that comes halfway between the end point of one interval and the starting point of the next interval. Alright, so the first one you see, the midpoint between 20 and 21 would be 20 and a half, or 20.5. The midpoint, or the halfway point between 40 and 41, would be 40.5, and so on. Next, we will fill in the midpoint column. There's a formula for the midpoint, and just like I said before, the midpoint is the halfway point of the interval. So to find the midpoint, you're going to take the lower endpoint plus the upper endpoint and divide that by 2. So you can see I've shown you what I'm plugging in for the first 2 midpoints. For the first interval, I did 20, or 1 plus 20 divided by 2, which is 10 and a half. And then for the second interval, I did 21 plus 40 divided by 2. And then the rest of them, I just went ahead and filled them in. I kind of followed the pattern. All right, now that I have filled in this frequency table, I'm going to proceed to draw my histogram. So here's my blank histogram. Here we have the intervals separated on the bottom. We have to fill that in. We have to fill in the frequencies on the vertical axis, and we need to give it a title so that if anyone else looks at it, they'll know what we're talking about. All right, so here I have went ahead and filled in parts of our histogram. I've put a title on it. I just called it Chocolate Candies and Trail Mix. You can call it whatever you want, just as long as it's related to the problem. And then I have filled in our intervals down here. I've got 1 to 20, 21 to 40, and so on. And then I filled in the frequencies from 1 to 11. I just went ahead and numbered the lines there. All right, so now I need to go back and look at my frequency table to fill in this histogram. So I've put the little frequency table down here at the bottom so that I can refer to it. So, and now I need to draw my bars. Now remember, histograms, the bars touch. So I've made sure and had the bars touching from 1 to 20, there were 0 chocolate candies that fell in that interval. So you see I don't have a bar for the first interval. And then from 21 to 40, there were 4. So you draw your bar up to the frequency of 4. For 41 to 60, there were 6. So I draw my bar up to 6. For 61 to 80, there were 7. So I draw my bar to 7. And then for 81 to 100, there were 4. So histograms give you a good way, a good, easy, quick way to see how the data is distributed. So that means how the data is spread out. So it looks like most of the trail mixes have between 61 and 80 chocolate candies. And then there's sort of more on this lower end than there is on the upper end. So only a few of them had between 81 and 100. Most of them have between 21 and 60. All right, so for the next problem, let me show that one to you. All right, so this one is the one I'm going to let you set up by yourself. It says test scores out of 100 points. So this is our data is test scores. So you can see the test scores are written out to the right-hand side, 92, 73, 59, and so on. All right, and it says to use 5 or 6 classes. So that means to use 5 or 6 intervals. And it's up to you how many you want to use. But the first thing, like I said before, the first thing you want to do is you want to take a look at your data and identify the smallest data point and the largest data point. All right, so here I have identified the smallest and the largest. The smallest is 59, the largest is 95. So I'm just going to break this up the classic way for test scores. I'm going to use 50 to 60, 61 to 70, 71 to 80, 81 to 90, and then 91 to 100. Now you could break this up in 5s if you wanted to. You could go 50 to 55, 56 to 60. It's just all what you prefer. To me, this is the easier way to do it. All right, so now that I've given you the intervals, you want to go through and fill in the frequency column, which is the number of values, and then proceed to draw your histogram from there. If you have any questions or if you want to check your answer about this histogram, you can just send me a picture of your histogram and I'll let you know if you have it set up correctly or not.